Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Mohammad Suhail Khan. In this particular session, I will be talking about establishing and managing rewards. Just to have a brief overview that how establishing and managing rewards fits into the whole HRM arena. So if we just looked at the typical HRM functions, HRM literature talks about the HRM functions, the strategic HRM, then it leads to human resource planning and job analysis, which eventually leads to recruitment and selection. After the selection, there's a whole process of socialization, career management, performance management, and then rewards management. So this specific topics basically somehow relate with each and every component of human resource management. In terms of how rewards are established and managed, let's try to seek out an answer of a easy question. So for example, what is your biggest motivator at work? Just think around your work environment and think that what are the motivators that you can get from your working environment. So for example, for some people it's promotions, and some people the work itself is really important for them. So if they are engaged in a project that has some learning elements in it, and the project gives some kind of opportunities to learn and practice something, or the project that have some kind of growth assignments in it. Some people are really motivated by doing that project. For some, recognition is really important. Sometimes people are being motivated if they think that they have control on their own work, if they have role clarity, if they do not have role ambiguity while doing their work. And definitely, sometimes the pay structures or the monetary benefits are really important in terms of motivating employees to work on their own projects. So here we can see that the rewards are basically divided into two main buckets or two main categories. So for example, one of the category that is about the intrinsic works. So for example, there's a whole literature that talks about the intrinsic rewards or intrinsic motivation. And just think about that. Intrinsic reward are some kind of rewards that are coming from inside. It's not somehow dependent on the outside element. It is not something dependent on the job per se, or it is not something dependent on the extrinsic elements that are outside the work itself. So for example, if we just go into detail about the intrinsic elements that a person or an employee definitely can be motivated if they has an opportunity to participate in the decision making. So for example, there's a whole literature of employee empowerment. There's a whole literature of employee involvement that talks about intrinsic reward. Again, if sometimes employees are really motivated if they see that they have greater freedom in terms of making their own decision, or in terms of working in their job. Think about employees involvement. Think about different quality circles. Think about different employees participation task that has been discussed in organizational literature. uh, Sometimes organization basically give more responsibility to their employees, and somehow those responsibilities kinds of act as a motivator for those employees. Again, we are talking about responsibilities that may be in the management or the leadership tasks that employees are being bound to do. Sometimes there are some growth opportunities that has been given to the employees, and employees really feel satisfied with those kinds of organization and being motivated to do something for the future of that organization. And sometimes there are diversity of activities. So for example, we are talking about work design. For example, we're talking about something that has diverse or different range of activities that employees perform in their work. So sometimes all those kinds of activities help employees to become motivated, and those kinds of activities are also treated as a reward in HR literature. While looking at the intrinsic rewards, let's talk about somehow the extrinsic reward elements. So if we just closely looked at that map, so in extrinsic reward somehow divides into two parts. So we are calling it a financial and non-financial rewards. So somehow we are kind of know that what kind of financial rewards are. So for example, in the financial rewards, we'll talk about the bonuses, we'll talk about the profit sharing, we may talk about services and perks, we'll talk about merit pay plans, we talk about some kinds of incentives. So these are the typical financial plans or the financial rewards that we read in HR literature or we have in HR literature. However, the more interesting element for me is extrinsic reward, but in terms of now non-financial aspects. So for example, what are the non-financial rewards that most of the organization give to their employees, and then somehow they try to motivate their employees to work for them. For the non-financial rewards, we have assigned parking spaces, preferred assignments, business cards, own secretary, and impressive title. So if you, for example, if you look at specifically all those elements that are included in the non-financial rewards, these are the kind of motivators that helps employees to perform well in their organizations, or employees are using them as a tool so that they can influence employees motivation. However, at the same time, all those things or all those elements or all those rewards basically do not have any kind of financial spendings on them. So for example, somehow if I am a CEO of an organization and if I have an assigned parking space in my organization, it's kind of a great privilege in a sense. So for example, if I am a kind of employee that think that reserved parking space or assigned parking space is kind of a privilege and has a kind of a social status for me, my organization can motivate me through this tool. Again, at the same time, you may have seen or even heard about that people are basically get even motivated when they are getting their own room as well. So for example, if I am working in cubicles with my colleagues and somehow I have been promoted or have some kind of organizational hierarchical attain some kind of organizational hierarchical level, organizations used these kinds of tool to motivate me. So for example, organizations may assign a separate room for me where I have my own secretary, where I have kind of distant with my colleagues or other employees of those organizations. Sometimes these impressive titles also make really sense. So for example, we have seen people writing production manager outside their offices. One of the impressive title, at least in the academic sector, is writing PhD or doctor in front of your name. So these are kind of the non-financial rewards that the organizations mostly uses to motivate their employees. If we just come back to the financial rewards, so for example, I think so most of those rewards are somehow we have talked about them, or we have at least read about them, or at least we have heard about those rewards. So for example, most of the financial rewards include bonuses, commission, incentive plans, merit pay plans, profit sharing, services and perks. So these are a couple of performance these are a couple of financial based plans that basically organization uses to motivate their employees. So in this slide I am trying to differentiate between intrinsic and extrinsic reward, and just try to talk about in detail about the extrinsic rewards specifically. So as we mentioned earlier, the intrinsic reward is something that comes from the job itself. However, extrinsic reward comes from the source that is outside the job. So just think in terms of what kind of things that comes from the job itself. So for example, if I'm working in an organization, and if I have some kind of organizational identity with that organization, so that also comes under the intrinsic rewards. Also, if there is any tool that basically impacts my organizational commitment, or basically impacts my job satisfaction, so somehow that also comes under the intrinsic reward. So intrinsic reward is basically somehow kind of the feeling of accomplishment in the work itself. So for example, there's a whole theory of work itself, or taking the pride into the work that you are doing. So for example, if somehow I am being a part of a part of any organization or a team per se, and that organization or that team specifically wins a project. That project can be $1 million project. However, despite of the dollars amount that is attached to that project, I am basically interested, or if I am basically interested in kind of the work that team is basically doing, and I basically have an honor of being a part of that team only. So that those kinds of rewards are basically categorized under the intrinsic reward. Sometimes, for example, if we complete any project or deliver the project in time, or for example, if we win some project, or for example, if we somehow completed a big task or a project, sometimes there's a feeling of accomplishment in that. So all those things basically come under the category of intrinsic reward. However, extrinsic reward is basically something that is opposite to all those things. So that includes money, that includes some kind of monetary benefits, that also includes some kind of benefits per se, and that benefits can be anything. So for example, it can range from the insurance policy to the stock options to the health insurance plans. Well, when I'm talking about the benefits, so those benefits can be anything. So for example, one of the benefits would be tuition reimbursement for either me or for my some close member of my family. Once we are looking at the extrinsic reward, so the extrinsic reward is kind of is a bigger bracket that covers all the items that are related with the financial matters. For example, where money is involved in some way, the promotions, or the moving in terms of vertical hierarchy, and all the benefits that's being attached with it. A typical examples of financial reward would be the wages. So for example, if somehow somebody is earning or getting pays in terms of weekly pay or a monthly pay as well. So that those things also come under the wages. We have also heard about the bonuses. A typical bonus would be, so for example, once you have finished this thing, of once you have finished the project, or if you're getting something extra on top of your monthly salary or yearly salary, that is basically a bonus. Now sometimes we got bonuses after the completion of the fiscal year. Those things are basically really common into the marketing or sales team, where they got a reward after finishing or after closing a sale. Profit sharing. So most of those kinds of plans are basically associated with the top hierarchy of the organization. So for example, VPs of the organizations, I'm talking about the presidents of the organization, I'm talking about the CEOs of the organizations, or I'm talking about someone who are basically above than the middle hierarchy. So those kinds of people or employees basically gets the profit sharing. So what happens that once all the profit of an organization is calculated, there's certain percentage. So for example, if I'm hired as a VP of marketing or VP of sales, so I will get a share of maybe 1% or 2% of the whole profit of that organization. So most of the times those profit sharing employees are in the top hierarchy of the organizations. Pension plans are I think so is a common one. So for example, it depends on the duration, and it basically depends on the time that you spent in the organization. So for example, some organizations have a pension plans after 20 years, some organizations have a plan after 15 years, some organizations do the pension plans after 25 years. So for example, if an employee is engaged with that organization since the last 30 years to 25 years, they are liable to get the pensions. Paid leaves. So somehow these kinds of financial rewards are somehow undermined, but if you really look at the advantages of those paid leaves. So for example, paid leaves mean that you are being paid while you are on the vacation, for example. So those kinds of financial rewards is something that is really matters to the employee. So for example, if I am on a vacation with my family somewhere, so in that particular time period, let's say that is like 2 weeks time period, so if I'm not earning anything in that time period, however, because of being on vacation, I am basically spending my money out of it. So paid leaves are kind of giving me opportunity to get at least monetary benefits of not being on work. So if we just see this this financial reward of not being at work, so now you may understand the benefit of this particular financial reward. In terms of non-financial rewards, I think so we already talked in detail about the non-financial rewards, where for example, a dedicated car parking space is something that somehow attracts some kind of people. So whenever we are talking about these rewards plan, we have to think in a way that what kind of people we are talking about. So for example, all these plans, all these either financial plans, either non-financial plans, either intrinsic rewards, either extrinsic reward, basically depends on the personality of your employee as well. So for example, maybe your employee A is much more motivated via intrinsic reward. However, employee B may be much more motivated from the extrinsic rewards, and maybe there is an employee in an organization, say, for example, employee C, that is much more motivated from the non-financial reward rather than a financial one. So we have to think in terms of that as well, that the plans are basically, we are catering the need of everyone, so we have to take care of the individual differences when we are establishing or when we are managing the rewards for our employees. So sometimes the financial rewards are based on the performance, and sometimes those rewards are basically based on the membership criteria. So now we have to look from a bigger lens or from a different lens. So for example, I think so we have read so much about the performance based rewards, or at least we heard that there's so much talking about the performance based reward, that rewards should be attached with the employee's performance. However, this is something that is being said in the literature, is being talked since last 50 years at least, not if not more than that, but at least in the last 50 years organizational literature talks about tying rewards with the performance of the employees. However, till now there are some literatures that said that still at this time organizations are hard to figure out that how the rewards can be attached with the performance. So some of the very very common rewards that are being attached with the performance are basically the commission. So I think so if we just think in a way, we have seen those kinds of rewards mostly in a sales category. So for example, the people or the employees who are involved in sales basically gets all these kinds of rewards. So for example, if they sell some unit or the n number of units of any particular product or service, they are kind of liable to get some commission out of it. Sometimes we heard about the piecework pay plans. So piecework pay plans means that if an organization has a set criteria of production. So for example, if an organization says that if my employee will be producing I don't know 50 units of shirts per day, then that organization will be paying that employee per unit. So for example, if the cost of producing one unit of shirt would be like $10, so at the end of the day, or for example at the end of that 50 units of shirt, that particular employee will be paid $500. So in this kind of pay plans, employees are being paid by the number of units or by the piece of work that they are being doing. Sometimes employees are liable for the group bonuses as well. So a typical example that is coming into my mind at this time is also about the sales team. So for example, typically, for example, if I'm working for sales team A and I have another, and then there is another team in the organization, say for example sales team B. However, the total sales of my team, that is sales team A, is kind of more than sales team B. Then at the end of the fiscal year or the end of the month, depends on how they have been distributed, I will be, or my group or my team will be given a bonus. So for example, once you are a part of the team and once your team is doing good, you are liable to get that bonus. So now an individual is basically being benefited just because of being a member of that particular team or that particular group. However, sometimes those rewards are not really attached with the performance. So for example, organization is not requiring employees to at least perform and then gets the benefits out of it. So for example, a typical example of a member based rewards would be if the cost of living increases. So for example, most of the time in most of the countries, after every fiscal year, employees salaries has been increased, and one of the reasons that is being given is because the cost of living has been increased in the last, for example, 1 year. So that's why your salaries also increase. And somehow, for example, if I am working in a place where our cost of living was kind of not higher, but however now my company has decided to send me in kind of a very big city where my cost of living will increase, so somehow they will also accommodate me in that way. Sometimes those benefits are also attached with just being a member of that organization. So for example, if I'm working, just say in a fast food company, I may get a benefit of getting a 30% to 40% discount on every meal that I purchase from my organization. So sometimes you are kind of getting benefits just because of being a member of that particular organization. So hopefully this lecture will help you in terms of understanding that how organization basically establish and manage the reward system. One of the things that I just really want to reiterate in terms of understanding about, or in terms of thinking about the rewards, is to think about individual differences between the employees. So for example, there are different categories of rewards for different kinds of employees. So most of those rewards are basically for different kind of personalities. So for example, now organization needs to think in a way that which kind of employee can be motivated from which kind of reward. So I hope this will give you enough understanding in terms of how organizations are basically establishing and managing the rewards for their employees. Thank you very much.